We're excited to welcome John Bielenberg and Brandt Williams, founders and creators of Thinknado, a framework to stimulate creativity to tackle complex problems. We're using the Thinknado process in certain episodes of Doom and Bloom to brainstorm ideas that relate to our climate breakdown. Me and a team member from Climate Designers will generate ideas for you all, our listeners, to explore. During this episode, our conversation breaks down the Thinknado process into 4 steps. Wait Why, which examines the status quo. Maybe, which identifies possibilities. What If, which expands the realm of possibilities. And Try This, which implements ideas through small experiments. We also talked about the importance of creative thinking in addressing and solving big challenges, and explained how designers can leverage their skills to support climate action, moving from extractive to regenerative practices. Check out Thinknado at thinknado.com. That's thinknado.com. Enjoy the episode. Hey, John. Hey, Brandt. Thanks for joining us today. Super excited to chat with you all. But before we dive in, can you share with us a little bit about yourselves, perhaps your background and what you do for a living?
I'll go first. My background was graphic design, and I had a firm in San Francisco for many years. After about 20 years of running a design firm, doing regular design projects for big corporations, started thinking about these big challenges that humans are facing at unprecedented levels, like climate change is one of them, species extinction, population growth, things like that. And how design can be used as a process to address those challenges. And at the same time, I started to think that humans were idiots, that we form these neural pathways in our brains over time. And once they're established, we're pathological about following those pathways to predictable answers. And so combining the design thinking with how do you get people to come up with radical new ideas? Because you can't just keep following those same neural pathways. And in 2003, started a program called Project M. I had moved from San Francisco to the coast of Maine, and I wanted to experiment with young people in that transition from college to getting jobs and kind of infect them with the idea that what you do for your job can have a significant impact on the future. And out of that came this thinking wrong process that I started to develop. Then I met Brandt, and he was resonating at the same frequencies. And we came up with this new idea called Thinknado. Brandt, I'll let you take it.
Thanks, John. It is so funny how we collected and converged at the same time on the idea of building something for people to be creative. I spent my early life I've been accused of being a serial entrepreneur. I was early Microsoft, early Apple, and then did a series of startups and was just a business guy in marketing and understanding the creative process and getting people to do different things. And in that process, having run various organizations and doing several startups, it dawned on me that people were actually much more creative than they gave themselves credit for. And so my goal was to try to create a place where they could be the most creative, make the most impact, have the most interest for themselves and for the organization and for the community at large. At the time, John was running a really cool project at California College of the Arts. I was teaching in the MBA program just as a hobby to keep my hand in with younger people. And we converged on the idea that we should do something to amplify people's voices and their ability to make creative choices, and also amplify people's creativity to solve these big problems.
And now you all have Thinknado. So before we get into the process itself, tell us a bit more about the company, the work that you're doing together, who you're working with. What is Thinknado?
John, you want to start that, or do you want me to?
Go ahead.
When John and I came together, and he had written a book, Think Wrong, and he gave me a book, and I went, God, this is really cool. This is really interesting. I've been doing very similar things. Thinknado came and was sort of born out of the process of making the idea of getting to a creative place quicker, easier, faster, and not scary. So a lot of people think that they're not creative. They say, well, I'm not a creative. I don't draw. I don't play music. I don't do those things. But everybody is creative. And that was a sticking point for the teams that I had been working with for years. And so Thinknado was born out of the idea of getting people to a place where they could be very quickly understand that they could, in fact, be creative and understand how the creative process works. We came up with essentially a 4-step process that allows people to sort of get there in a game sort of fashion that's not troubling, not difficult, something that's easy to get to and you can go fast.
It's a lot easier to follow existing neural pathways. It's just like it's easier to sit on the couch and watch TV than go for a run or a bike ride or go to the gym. And so we felt like to make this as easy as possible, as easy to remember, as easy to do, it will encourage people to do it more often, because normally you don't go through that. You just follow the same ideas.
You mentioned the Thinknado process, and from my understanding, there's 4 steps. There's wait, why, maybe, what if, and try this. So would love to have the two of you unpack each of those steps and tell us what they're all about.
Sure. The first step is really examining what the status quo is, why something is the way it is. So we ask the question, wait, why? And if you look at a problem and just pick any sort of issue, whether it's homelessness or food insecurity or species extinction, or something as simple as I need to have a better communication with my family. You ask the question, wait, why? And you have to ask it kind of like that. You have to say, why is something the way it is? And if you unpack why something is over and over and over again, and ask it kind of like a toddler, why, you get to the kernel of what the truth is. And that's that inherent truth that we understand why something is the way it is. And there's a lot of reasons why things are the way they are. They could be cultural, they could be legal, they could be convention. There's all kinds of reasons. A lot of times the reasons don't really matter so much if you're trying to change behavior or understand why something is the way it is. Now, recycling is a good example of that. Why do we do the things that we do? Because it makes us feel good. Does it actually have an impact? Well, there's some studies that say that most of the things that get recycled don't make it actually into a recycling facility or even get recycled. They just end up in a landfill. But if you unpack the whys to why we do certain things, then you really understand them. And until you get that deeper understanding, you really can't go to the next step. So we spend a lot of time understanding that. The next step is really asking a couple of questions. And the maybe step is, maybe it's possible to. And if you answer that question, if you fill in the blank, if you will, with a question, maybe it's possible to understand how to communicate better. Maybe it's possible to understand why homelessness is the way it is. If you start asking those questions, you're going to start looking at places where there's an inflection point that may not be the status quo. The idea here is to get out of what we know, out of the place that is familiar to us, because that's an easy place to go. And in our brains, we know exactly how to answer those questions because we've seen them before. And that kind of thing is really good for survival, feeding yourself, being warm, understanding your shelter requirements, the Maslow's need hierarchy. Those things are great, but it's really not good for innovation. So you start by asking, maybe it's possible to.
The third step is what if? And this was really stimulated by something that Steve Jobs said once, where everything around us, the table, the chair I'm sitting at, the computer, the pens, the paper, was invented by somebody. And that somebody is no smarter than you, right? And what he meant by that is just because a table happens to look like this doesn't mean that's the way it always needs to be, right? So the what if is really, what if a table didn't look like this or wasn't made out of this kind of material? And at Apple, he was always challenging people about, if they said, well, glass can't do that, he'd go, well, what if we invent a new glass, right? So the what if is really expanding the realm of possibility past what you already think. And to do that, we use these think wrong techniques, because you need to get out of the status quo to come up with new stuff. And once you have a challenge, maybe it's possible to make my life more exciting on a daily basis, right? The challenge can be anything. Then your brain will immediately go to a file folder full of everything you know about making your life more exciting. We don't want to do that. So there are a bunch of different techniques, tricks, really, tricking your brain into coming up with new ideas rather than following the pathways. In the Thinknado toolkit, the way we do that is we have two sets of what if cards. One set has a word on it, like aggressive or beautiful, and the other one has an image. And these are just random images. It could be aggressive teddy bear, right? So you pick two cards, and that's where you start. And so you have no correlation between how do I make my life more exciting and aggressive teddy bear, right? Which is kind of terrifying. But so you have to come up with new ideas. You can't just go to that file folder because there are no aggressive teddy bear ideas, right? So it forces you to kind of come up with new ideas. It usually takes people a while to get the hang of it because there's no connection in your brain. So you have to forge new neural pathways to come up with ideas. But once people get going, I guarantee that the ideas they come up with will not be the same that they would have without the prompt, right? So it always works. The last piece of this, once you've generated a lot of alternative ideas, the more the better. The last piece is called try this. And so it's one thing to come up with ideas, another one to actually implement those and get traction. And a lot of times, if there's something that's a radical new idea, it will get squashed. It's so easy to stop an idea at its birth. And so what you want to do is try what's a small bet? What can I do that is doable with minimum resources and see if it's going to get some traction, right? And so you want to create out of your most compelling ideas a portfolio of small bets, right? And actually try them. And once they get momentum, it's a lot easier to keep that momentum going. It's like if you light a match, it's really easy to just put it out. But once it starts building up and it's a flame or a fire, it's much harder to stop that idea from going forward. So those are the 4 steps we use. And we've kept it as simple as possible, as easy to remember as possible.
One of the things that's the hardest for people to do in this process is give them permission to think differently, to actually build a place in their brain that says, well, that's a crazy idea, and not shut it off. That self-editing process is where most people get stuck. And our process allows them, in a sense, gives them permission to sort of say, well, what does aggressive teddy bear have to do with making my life more interesting? Or what does that have to do with solving a homelessness issue that's in my neighborhood, or creating a community that speaks more to each other in a rational manner? The process sort of, if you will, eliminates those barriers as much as we possibly can, because it's simple and it's fast.
We've found that kids are really good at this because they haven't been trained yet. Their brains haven't been developed fully, for one thing, but they still have permission to think wrong. The older people get, the less likely they are to kind of deviate from the norm or the status quo. Corporate executives are some of the worst. McKinsey partners, I think they're the worst because they think they know the right answer. And this is all about the wrong answers.
The one thing I really gravitate towards with this Thinknado process and how it fits into the Doom and Bloom podcast is that the doom part that I talk about is acknowledging the challenges that we're facing, acknowledging this uncertain future that we're all stepping into, that doom part, right? And that's where the first step comes in, the wait, why. It's acknowledging the status quo, it's acknowledging our existing world today. And then when you kind of go through the Thinknado process, the bloom element of the doom and bloom phrase it comes out in the what if section. It's the possibilities. It's the creative engine behind the process, in my opinion, that allows us to trick our brain to see what's possible, showing people the world that we can create, acknowledging the challenges, but showing people that, hey, we don't have to just dwell on that. We can actually use our creativity, use the skills that we have to create that thriving world that benefits all living species, that bloom world that we're wanting to create. Another reason why I like the Thinknado process is that it's enough of a framework to help people, but it's not too prescriptive. It's pretty simple. It's just 4 steps that allow people to step into uncharted territory with just enough guidance for them to not feel lost or uncertain on where to go. And I've always appreciated the Thinknado process because of that. And just to give our listeners a little bit of a history lesson here, we've actually done the Thinknado process during the Project Blue Sky experience. This is a 2-week experience that we, climate designers, produce to bring people together, to come together to create climate positive work in the high desert of California. So if you're interested in learning more about Project Blue Sky, definitely check that out on the website. So our community, we're full of designers from all walks of life. We have design adjacent professionals as well. Our members work in a variety of design disciplines, companies, studios. We also have a lot of independent designers. And so each of them are working on taking climate action in a number of ways. So I want to ask you all, how can the Thinknado process help them in creating climate forward design work?
The process itself lends itself to not accepting status quo answers. So that's the general gist of this, is, and I think we've covered this, is that we really don't want the same thing over and over and over again. And when you look at climate action as one of the SDGs, that's so big and so broad that it encompasses millions and millions of people, billions of people, the entire planet, all the species. Well, how do we do that? I mean, that's an impossible thing to even wrap our heads around just because of the sheer scale. But if you start pulling it down into places where we can have maximum impact, and using the Thinknado process to pinpoint where we can have maximum impact. And that's the goal as you start essentially the 4-step process. And I might add, the 4-step process isn't answers, it's all questions. And that is one of the keys to how to engage in a Thinknado, is to ask these questions and be able to give yourself the freedom to be able to create postulates around those big thorny issues. As designers, as business designers, as designers of all sorts, industrial designers, graphic designers, et cetera, communication designers, it's very important that we bring these things down to manageable meals, if you sense, and be able to address them and work with them.
I think each of these steps addresses a point that can stop people, right? So that the wait why is really, you have to examine the way things are, because you can't move past until you really look at that, right? So you can't generate ideas unless you know where you're starting from. The maybe it's possible, you have to create a challenge, so kind of what you're addressing. So after evaluating the way things are, you can then create a challenge statement, the maybe statement. The what if, how do you come up with ideas, right? So that step is important to keep you from going into that file folder full of existing ideas that you already know. And then the try this gets past that initial stumbling block. How do I get this started? How do I get momentum? So each of these are very strategic to address the points that can stop positive action.
Something I share often with folks is that let's acknowledge, as a profession, let's acknowledge that designers have contributed to our climate breakdown. We extract materials to make things. We create things that are then put out into the world that is used once, twice, maybe 3 times, gets discarded. We create campaigns and messages that instill certain behaviors that might not be so positive towards our environment. And the list goes on. And if you kind of pause for a minute and just take a look at the skills that designers have, hard skills and soft skills, we can really flip the script and we can really contribute in a positive way. We can show up and support the scientists, the researchers, the policymakers, so that the work that they're doing can get in front of as many people as possible. The work that they're doing can get the right funding. The work that they're doing can actually scale to the size and impact that we really need it to. I feel like this framework can allow designers to let go of how we used to work in the past in ways that were extractive and degenerative, and allow us to reimagine the skills that we have today in a more regenerative, positive way. So again, another reason why I really appreciate the very simple, approachable Thinknado process. Before we sign off, anything else you want to share, maybe we didn't talk about in terms of the process, knowing that our listeners are at the intersection of design and climate?
I think the intersection of design, climate applies to everyone. It's all inclusive. And the reality is that we design our own futures. And so whether we're actually, quote, capital D designers, or we're small d designers in our own futures, we have the ability to do that. And nothing is more obvious to me right now in this current political environment across the globe, not just our local American political landscape, but our tossing out of incumbents across the globe. The reality is that we have every opportunity to keep ourselves in a place where we can make the biggest impact and the most positive impact as possible. And it starts with us as individuals. And then it can grow, and it should grow.
Even as a little kid, I was always perplexed at how human beings, like we have this great capacity for knowledge, technology, art, literature, science, that we can do great things. We can put people on the moon and all kinds of stuff. Yet we behave like idiots. We have the capacity to address some of these big issues. And we've done a terrible job through human history at really looking at everything as a system and a whole. So things like Thinknado and this kind of process, like, get at the best qualities of human ability, the ability to conceive something brand new that nobody's ever seen and have the wherewithal to actually implement it and get it going and have an impact, right? So it's really trying to counteract the worst parts of human behavior.
John Brandt, thanks for joining. This was a great conversation, and looking forward to kicking off the season with lots of episodes unpacking big challenges using the Thinknado process.
Thanks, Mark. Glad to be here.
Yeah.
Thanks for tuning in to today's episode of Doom and Bloom. A big thank you to the incredible team behind the podcast, Camille Graham, Jacqueline Demchek, Holden Hardcastle, and our music producer, Albert Paul. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe and leave a comment, and definitely share it with someone who can use a little bloom in their life. Follow us on Instagram at climatedesignersorg, and don't forget to tag us in your projects. We'd love to see how our episodes inspire you. You can also email us at hello@climatedesigners.org to share how you're turning inspiration into action. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.